Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once more. I am Michael Zell, and welcome to Amateur Apologetics. It's great to have you guys here. I have with me, of course, my dearest sibling, Lunar Smiles. If you want to go ahead and say hi.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Welcome, everybody. And today we are continuing our deep dive, or rather introductory, cursory overview of scripture of the Bible and Christianity in general. The general idea that I have here is that this is meant to be mostly educational. It's pretty, I would say, maybe not skin deep in one sense, but cursory. It's meant to be like a 10,000 foot kind of view of what we read, and if there are any questions, particularly on an apologetic side of thing, which is kind of a hobby of mine. Again, apologetics is basically just means to defend or a defense of. It comes from the Greek apologia. And the amateur, of course, comes from the French amour, which means I love apologetics. I love to defend stuff. And having been an ex-con and an ex-atheist myself, it is something that I'm passionate about, just allow people to ask questions and to field these sort of topics that sometimes can come off as uncomfortable, or a lot of people just don't feel like they have the freedom to just be like, all right, seriously, what's this all about? And don't give me like the bless me Father for I am, or throw holy water at me if I don't believe what you believe kind of thing. It's meant to be chill, it's meant to be educational, and hopefully we're all the better for it. I also welcome anybody who has a differing opinion or a differing religious view or a different philosophy on how the world ought to work or does work or what have you. And I'm not going to debate with you. That's not really what this is for. But, a statement of your beliefs and an unveiling of what your views are is perfectly welcome, just as well. That's basically what we're doing here. And anything deeper than that, I'm certainly more than willing to sit down, hash it out, give an apologetic or give a reason for the belief that you have in a way that is, whether it's kind and courteous, or whether it's hey, let's have some verbal fisticuffs and let's work it out. Let's fight it out. Let's see whose ideas are correct or wrong. But not in this format. We're just going to chill and go at it together. And so, previously on our episode, which we missed last week, which was mostly my fault. I just wasn't feeling up to it, to be honest, and bad on me for that, perhaps. But sometimes that's just the way it is, right? But let's just go to my other screen. So previously we were doing Matthew 6, and we were talking about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is this really famous thing that everybody has probably heard of, but nobody really knows the content of, except for maybe the Lord's Prayer, which is actually what was in this one, is, the Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That thing that people draw, or rail off, from time to time, but I'm not sure if they really get what it meant. But it also talks about how to be humble in how you give. It again talks about how to pray. That's where you kind of get the idea of not being flashy, basically, not being narcissistic in how you do things, how you fast. The same thing. It's not even like if you should fast. It's actually more of like whenever you fast. It's like it's a given that you're probably going to fast. But again, this is written for a first century Jewish crowd primarily, and nevertheless it's usually considered best practice, and then also how one ought to collect things, how you should deal with your goods, the things that you get in this life. Do you hoard up treasure, or do you seek after that which is eternal, which is relationships and that sort of thing? And same thing about anxiety, which is something our culture is all about. Very anxious, myself included. I think, Lunar, I think I heard a hint of anxiety in your voice this morning, even regarding your moving soon.
For sure.
Yeah.
Very anxious month. Very Very rough month.
Yeah. So understandable, moving and all that stuff is definitely is not a fun time. So, but yeah, did you have any questions or anything over from last time or anything like that you felt?
No,
hey, let's start
it's
off
been
with that.
2 weeks, so I might need that refresher too.
It's blank, and that's okay. We're just going to go off. I don't prepare for this, partly because, look, you don't get to prepare when you come in here, like people who are coming to watch. And so I feel like if I'm over-prepared, then I have a major agenda, and it's meant to be more relaxed. And so hopefully that comes across. I do have a moderate amount of education in this area. So, I mean, I did go to Bible college, so I should know a few things. I've read this thing, I think, about 3 times all the way through, multiple more times, sections of it, because the Psalms are really nice to read if you're praying and stuff like that. And, Paul's letters, which are like kind of like academic essays of theology in like the old school way, and it really tackles these really interesting ideas, but they're so compact and there's so much to chew through, as are of course the Gospels, which are just chock full of things Jesus says that makes that it shines a light on some stuff, and you're like, oh, I agree with that, but that's hard. It's hard to really consider that sort of stuff. All right, would you like to read the section?
You want to read the first section? I'm gonna make myself some food just real quick while I listen.
No trouble at all. All right. So continuing on with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, this is his last section, essentially, this last sort of chapter, if you will. This section, again, these are headings and numbers are actually placed in by following people, and it's used as usually the Jewish culture had mnemonic devices, so they were able to use their language with in sort of a, maybe not a rhyme, but like a poetic verse kind of style, so that it was easier to remember. Later on, I believe it wasn't even the Greeks, it was probably Latin more, if I remember correctly, where numbers were inserted in different titles and stuff, so that was their device to memorize scripture a little bit easier, because of course we didn't have the printing press, and mass copies of the Bible just didn't exist until, what was it, like, I don't know, 1600. I can't quite remember when printing press was big, but yeah, so that was kind of the deal. But yeah, so this section is called Do Not Judge. And so, do not judge, so that you won't be judged. For with the judgment you use, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, and look, there's a log in your own eye? Hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Don't give what is holy to dogs, or toss your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them with their feet, turn and tear you to pieces. This is a really chock full section, and I really like it. By the way, anybody who's watching or anything like that, please feel free to jump in, have any questions. If you hate it, tell me you hate it. If you love it, you tell me you love it. I don't care. So the first line is something that I think people don't understand, and I just want to break it down a little bit for you. And so when it says do not judge so that you won't be judged, that doesn't mean you never think critically. A lot of people think that judgment means discernment, to sift out, to figure out, to push back. So people tend to read this and say, oh, thou shalt not judge, as in everything is permissible. Don't even think about what I'm doing that may be right or wrong. Just don't judge at all. But judgment is more like to pass judgment, to condemn, to
not analyze,
to put in its final state, I suppose you could be for something that is moral. And it's not even saying that you should never do that at all. It's saying recognize that if you are to judge, that you must recognize that you too are judged, and use that as your measure. So don't.
Right.
So, for example, a thief shouldn't tell another thief that he's stealing, and that's bad. because he too is a thief. You know,
exactly.
So, so that's the point here. It's not to. So a lot of people read things like meekness and to not judge and make that suggest like you need to be a pushover and to ignore, you know, ignore the man behind the green curtain, you know, kind of thing. It's actually quite the opposite. It is, if you're going to judge, be sober about what your judgment is going to be, because that's how you're going to be measured as well, you know. And so yeah, I just find like this one is, a lot of people twist this for some reason. It's always taken out of context, or it's always like, it's like, oh, don't judge me. I was like, no, it's like, I'm sober minded enough to look at myself and say, no, that's actually incorrect moral behavior, or, you know, that's probably not something I should be doing.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you have the ability to say, well, I have that insight because I look in myself first and judge that person and say, this is where I need to shore up, you know? So, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. Let's see. Anything else that... So what I like about this translation is they usually call it a speck, as in a speck of dust kind of thing. So and that's what the image that Jesus is using here. And when he's saying a log, he's actually thinking of like the log you would use like in a boat or a building or something like that. Like, and so he says to not be a hypocrite. The worst thing, and this is kind of coming up with the idea of a thief, right? It's like, if you've stolen $1 million, you're a bank robber, you know, and you're slapping the hand of somebody who took a penny from the penny jar to put into the, you know, the cashier or whatever. Is like, that's the significance of the hypocrisy that people do.
Hypocrisy.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, super. So I love that he uses a lot of images that are really applicable for the time. And it's one of the reasons why I, as a person, am naturally prone to going to a metaphor that I think other people can use. I think that human beings are actually fundamentally storied people. We tell, or we view life through a story, and we usually look at ourselves as the main character, right? And in order to learn things, we sort of apply our prior knowledge from a different thing and apply it to a new thing to try and understand it better, to get a grasp on it. And that's why I love metaphors, and that's why I love that, you know, a good teacher is able to do that. I think is say, well, what they're able to kind of say, well, what's your passion? Oh, you like video games? Well, this thing I'm trying to teach you about is like this type of video game, you know, and apply it to your knowledge. That's what a good teacher is able to do, and that's what I think fundamentally Jesus attempts to be. I think quite successfully in this whole Sermon on the Mount and the rest of his teachings. So it's kind of neat.
Looking forward to continuing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the whole pearls before swine quote is from this. And this is actually a really interesting thing too, where not only is it, here's where I think, again, this gets kind of removed because it's the judge not lest ye be judged, you know, the old language. But the actual point of don't give what is holy to dogs or toss your pearls before pigs is probably the most important thing that's in this entire thing that at least at this point, but I mean, even in the Sermon on the Mount, this is probably the number one thing for our culture, for today's culture, that really needs to be put in practice. And it's this idea that if you can scream at somebody, even if it's pure, holy, amazing knowledge, and this is for religious people in particular too, but I mean, I'm talking ideological, you know, zealots of whatever bent, you know, communism, socialism, you know, capitalism. But yeah, so all of these different things that you might believe, if it is of good use, but somebody is just not equipped to hear it, whether that's because they are, diametrically opposed in who they are and what they believe, or they're just they have an incapacity to actually understand whatever that is, your constant expression or explanation or whatever it is, I would say verbal diarrhea of whatever you believe upon that person is almost always going to be detrimental. It's not going to work. And we have this culture that is obsessed with giving opinions, their own personal opinions, and railing across, the multiverse of technology that we have, thinking that it's like it must be affecting lots of people. But usually all you're doing is getting people to hear your own jazz, right? It's like people who are already predisposed to accepting your opinion are the ones that you're getting a rah from. And so it's only, to me, it's only appropriate. I'll bring it to the religious aspect. I don't like talking about religious stuff for those who don't want to talk, only for those who are actually open to hearing about it, right? I'm not going to be out on the street, screaming, preacher stuff, to strangers, right? Because it's not the appropriate place to do that. The appropriate place is to ask somebody, hey, are you interested in actually learning about this? And if the answer is no, then leave them the frig alone. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I'm not saying that person isn't in need of hearing that message either, but there's a time and a place for that individual to come to that knowledge. And a good example would be like, recently I've thought about getting a trade, right? And like learning to do things like carpentry or plumbing or something like that, just because I think it would actually be a really useful skill, and it makes some decent money as well, right? Now, when I was probably 13 or 14 when my uncle Armand sat down and said, you need to get a trade. And that guy,
I actually remember that.
You remember that, right? And he was like, if you guys, that's his thing, right? Like, his thing was like, the only smart thing in life is to get a trade to provide, that kind of spiel. And almost every time that I was around, he would say it to the point that I would kind of automatically be turned off and rolling my eyes and everything like that.
Right. I can relate in a different way, but yeah.
Yeah. It's taken 20 years for me to come to the decision. He was probably right. He was correct at that time. I honestly
kind of wish I went that direction too, to be honest.
Right. But and it so it wasn't that he was wrong in any way, shape, or form. It's partly the way in which he was sending that message was not helpful. It was going on deaf ears. He was throwing pearls of wisdom before a piggish asshole that I was. And I might not have turned to bite him to pieces like this is saying, but it's there's a time and a place for certain conversations, and
right.
There's an
and I get like
sphere.
Adults are just trying to help the kids understand, but kids will be kids.
Exactly. And so I think there needs to be those lines of communication open. There needs to be a willingness to sit down, and there needs to be a fertile ground for those seeds to go. And I'm thinking we're probably going to get there in a second in this. Once we get to the seed sowing stuff, it's kind of interesting. Right. But yeah, anyway, I'll keep talking unless you want to keep reading, but I can read here. I know you're probably still cooking breakfast.
I'm almost ready to read, but yeah.
No worries.
Winter's mom was here and was talking a bit, and
I had to listen to two people talk at once while making food.
No,
the food was still packed away.
Yeah, no.
Wrestle with that.
No worries. No worries. All right, I'll continue then. Okay. So keep asking, searching, and knocking. So keep asking, and it will be given to you. Keep searching, and you will find. Keep knocking, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and to the one who searches finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. What man among you, if his son asks him for some bread, we'll give him a stone. Or if he asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake. If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask of him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also the same for them, for this is the law and the prophets. This is an interesting section.
Yeah, that is. Someone like myself, I always have issues asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I actually managed to do with this move because I was starting to get overwhelmed, and
Mm-hmm.
I reached out for help, and someone helped me pack and helped me move stuff over to the new place. And less anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we misunderstand, or we fail to realize how much we need one another in a community, and I'm like, this is where the irony, or maybe even the hypocrisy comes from me, because I'm a pretty loner guy fundamentally. I don't always want help. I don't always seek that out. It almost gives me more anxiety to ask somebody than to just do it myself. Now,
yeah, no, I completely get that, and that's part of where the things come from. It's like, yeah, I don't want to ask for help because they're gonna fuck it up.
well, and again, that's exactly it. But nevertheless, people need us as much as we need them. And this is what this is pointing to, but it's also pointing primarily to the idea of God. And this is where I think I
definitely got that with the saying, for sure.
This is where I think the importance of understanding one thing. This is where I got lost as a kid, and I'll go over it right quick. If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask of him? This is where I thought this is probably where I started branching off from Christianity and becoming an atheist early on. Is because I asked for good things, what were good in my mind, and was never granted them, even though I asked a lot. And so I felt like that was a contradictory thing. The issue, and this is where like the idea of the knowledge of God versus our knowledge, particularly when we're kids, of what is actually good, not just in the temporary sense, but in the long-term sense, and being given good things. That's something that I needed to wrestle with, and it took me a long time to figure that out. Like, I could ask all the time for bad stuff, but it would kind of contradict God's nature to explicitly, give something that's going to ruin me in the long term, right? So his vision is, at least in this conception, it's important to balance that out, I think. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I wrestled with it a lot. The other part, the last part of this is really important. Therefore, whatever you want from others, or whatever you do, so the normal quote is, "Do unto others as you would have them do to you."
Yeah, I know that one. I live by that one, actually.
Yeah, that's what he's saying here is the law and the prophets. What he means by that is everything in the Old Testament can be summed up by that alone. And he's basically that's what the whole principle of all the other, like, there's in the Jewish texts, there's 613 laws that they were supposed to follow, which is a ridiculous amount of laws. And he's trying to say, like, his whole idea of like coming, and he said this earlier, right? He's like, I haven't come to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill it. Part of that fulfillment is, look, let's simplify this for a second. And everything that was written in the past was meant to be encompassed by this concept that you care for others and they'll care for you. Treat one another the same, have the same value on your life as much as on the value of others' lives. Make those equal, right? And that's what so he's trying to sum it up like that. And that was a really like radical thing to say at the time. So you can't sum up 613 laws. It's like, well, I just did. But yeah. Entering the kingdom. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravaging wolves. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, neither can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that doesn't produce good fruit is cut down and thrown in the fire. So you'll recognize them by their fruit. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? Then I will announce to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you lawbreakers. This is another pretty crazy, tough section. Lots in here. So the first part I'll say is about the gate. The idea that the way into heaven, if you want to call it that way, is really narrow, and the way to destruction is very broad. And what he's trying to show this is like in a castle wall or in a keep or something like that. He'll talk about it later, I think, but another place he'll say is like, the only people who go over the walls are thieves and criminals. If you really want to enter in a place, lawfully, reasonably, in a good way, you go through the main gate. You're welcomed, especially if you're a child. If you're welcomed, if you're a child of the king, kind of thing, that's the way to go in. And anybody else who tries to go over ends up getting destroyed. You're a criminal. You're a thief. You're an intruder. You're breaking into my house. Yep. So that is an unlawful entry, and I will blow you the hell away. It's just the way it works. I mean, that's been the way it works for centuries, for thousands of years. And so when people say, "Oh, I'm going to go to heaven just cuz," that's why he kind of brings it back to even the people who claim to be, a Christian or a religious person or worthy of heaven and everything like that, and say, well, I did good things. So yeah, but I don't know you personally. I don't have there's no relationship there. There's no, and the big thing in the middle is, and kind of to emphasize this just for a second, is like the people who are truly aligned with good things in this world do good things. They don't say good things. Right? Lots of people, you could say lots of great things, and this is maybe my other maybe harsher condemnation on the day and age that we live in, is people will go crazy and hate or reject or denounce people who do bad things, right? But don't themselves do any good things. They're quick to point out. It's like, oh, look at that guy, he's bad. And it's always, I feel like, an attempt to detract or distract from their own failings, And again, this is why the whole start of this thing is about not judging, right? Judge not, lest ye be judged. And yet our entire culture is, like, ironically supposed to be the ones that are the most, the least judgmental, the most welcoming and accepting of different things. And yet it's always this, like, I don't know, there's this and again, I'm not saying everybody, it's like the popular culture, I suppose, is what I would say. The news and the TikToks and the X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, all that social media stuff, those are the things that get the most views and the most reaction out of people. Is like, well, this person got caught doing this thing or whatever, right? It's like, well, do we ever figure why we're doing that? You know, like what we're trying to detract from, even from our own, you know, looking at ourselves. Maybe that we have a log in our own eye, you know, and this is a speck of dust in contrast. I don't know. I mean, it makes me concerned.
Yeah, no kidding. False prophets. Where false prophets? Everyone, I hear that a lot these days too. Heck, there's an influencer called Anti-Prophet.
Oh, really? Nice.
He specifically brought up that passage too with the false prophets. It's like, don't believe me. Don't like. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's
chill, dude.
the best way to discern, and this is why I think judgment and discernment are two different things. To discern the nature of a person is to watch what they do with their lives. If they're doing good things, if they are elevating people, if they're you know, helping them in a physical or a mental way, spiritual way, whatever, if that's their goal, and if that's what shows out in their deeds, then you can discern that person is probably not a wolf, right? They're probably not chewing you up from the inside. But it's the ones that are on the to me, and this is what made me really go away from, and I don't go to church even now because I feel like it's still based in a bit of narcissism. You know, you have one guy running the show on stage saying all these fancy words, and I don't know him. I don't know his deeds. All I know is his words. You know, it's like the whole practice what you preach type of thing. If I don't know that, then I'm not, you know, that's where I need to be more discerning. I don't know if he's a wolf or not. And some of them, not all of them, whether they're on the political stage, on the religious stage, on the home front, your own parents, your own siblings, you know, if their words don't match their actions, something's wrong. There's a disconnect there, and that's where discernment really needs to be brought. But I think the more as important, I won't say more important, but as important is to looking at our own selves. Well, I'm the harshest critic of myself there is. You know, I always have to look in the mirror and say, am I doing what I'm saying? Is there a cognitive dissonance there? Is there something? Is there a break in reality? And how do I shore that up? One of the easiest ways you can do that is this is my favorite thing, and I hate it. It's my favorite thing in the sense of figuring out what you actually believe in, what you actually value, right? And the easiest way is to have as a list of 5 things. List your top 5 things that that are your main priorities in life, right? Take that time to do that. Sounds good, Allie. Welcome in. I appreciate you. So yeah, the best way to go about figuring out where you're at with this whole disconnect thing, write down a list of 5 things that you value the most in this life, and then like really think about it. Put your time as like, these are the things that I really value, you know, and they're usually high and mighty things. For me, it would be like faith is on top, you know, God is number 1, right? Let's say family, right? Anyway, so there's a list, and then make your list in terms of time. The amount of time you actually spend in things. And I guarantee you there's a disconnect. Ask me how much time I really spend with God, with my family. My family's pretty high up there. I'd say that's accurate, you know. But if I say like work or something like that, or my vision for my life, you know, working out, my health, something like that, I guarantee you my time is like nothing. There's a disconnect there, right? And that's not meant to be a condemnation of things. It's meant to be a discernment of things, and to turn yourself on your own eye and to say, well, and it's meant to to engender a sense of grace for other people who are not making those goals, who are not achieving the same values, you know? What's up, OTD? Welcome in. Anyway, so that's, look, all that to be said, it's a tough subject. I guess if that, yeah. So it's, I kind of got off on I keep distracted by the other things here. Sorry about that. But yeah, anyway, did you want to read the 2 foundations?
Sure.
All right.
2 foundations. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the rivers rose, and the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't collapse, because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't act on them will be a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house, and it collapsed. And its collapse was great. When Jesus had finished this sermon, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, because he was teaching them like one who had authority and not like their scribes.
Yeah, I'm convinced this is the original Three Little Pigs story. You know, it's very simple. It's very clearly, but that's what children's stories are meant to do. Right? They're meant to show basic principles on how reality works. And that's what I think that Jesus is attempting to do. He's and this is where the authority and this is where the teaching, like, aptitude. Yeah, it does sound like the Three Little Pigs, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, but that's where that authority and that aptitude comes from, is if you can't teach the child these concepts in a way that they grasp them, that they can see them, then an adult's not going to be able to get them either. At least not in its deepest, most fundamental truth level. And that's kind of what's going on in this whole Sermon on the Mount, which is why it's so famous, is he's trying to boil things down to the really just core fundamental nuggets of gold truth. And all the fluff that tends to be, you know, come out with like writerly, like that's why he says like scribes and everything like that too, right? It's like there's always this writerly people, there's these highly educated, amazing, you know, elite people. He's like that have this way of speaking that goes way over the head of the common man. But he's talking to common people. They're fishermen, they're farmers, they're, you know, they're tax collectors, they're soldiers, they're, you know, they're regular people. And if you can't connect, if you can't explain something to that crowd on a basic level, then what's the point, you know? So
yep, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, did anything stand out, or was there anything that sort of
nothing
that you had
in particular
questions or anything like that?
I feel like they missed the part where the little pig built the house on the dirt.
Right. Yeah.
The grass.
Yeah. He yeah. Basically. So it's like it should be like a, you know, one on sand, one on like a beachfront property, and the other one on like a stone mountain or something like that. You know, it's like that's really what the progression should have been.
For sure. But otherwise, good. Yeah, that was fine.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. Anybody else in the crowd, if you have any questions on anything that comes up or anything, any pushback, I love pushback. I'm perfectly happy to. You know, to hear your side of things and stuff like that. My desire again is mostly educational, to just, you know, wrestle around with some of this stuff. I haven't prepped or anything like that, so I'm just kind of going off my own, my becoming older Bible college knowledge. So
mm-hmm. There was one thing that actually did stand out, where after it said collapse, it said its collapse was great, kind of thing. So what's that about? You're celebrating the collapse of someone's house?
No, yeah. So it's basically like it's not just that people build their so fundamentally the idea of building your house on rock. Rock in this case is supposed to be truth, something that is unshakable, a pillar
for sure
that won't move, right? Versus sand, which can shift, right? It's kind of you're kind of
easily
getting undermined. Sure. You're undermining what your you're building your life upon. And that's what the house is.
It's supposed to be solid. The house is supposed to be solid and long lasting.
Right. And so the it's not just like you said, there should be a middle ground, right? If you did have like beachfront property, you can build an amazing house. Like it could be the most glorious house in the world on beachfront property, and you'll have a great view. But if it's built on something that the crust of the earth is slowly eroding, your truth of what makes your life even stand up becomes sucked from underneath of you. The greatest house is not just going to be greatly collapsing in the sense of a calamity itself, like it fumbles, but it's more tragic. It's great in its tragedy because you went to all that
makes sense,
that time and that effort to build an amazing house on something that's just going to collapse. And so to apply that to a worldview, to apply that to a religious truth or a political truth or anything that has to do with reality, if what you're building your life on is just sand, if it's clouds, if it's something that is mist that will be here now but gone tomorrow, then your life will also be here now but gone tomorrow, right?
Interesting. And
so it behooves the wise individual, to put into practice these words that he's saying, right? To again, like to be meek, to be humble, to not judge, but judge not, but recognize that at least if you are going to judge soberly with your own self in mind, with the same measure, to put these principles in your life in action. And if you do that, your life will be solid. Your entire house could be blown down, but at least you have that foundation. You have that rock with which you can rebuild. If you rebuild on top of sand, it's not going to be the rock that's going to
happen again.
Yeah, it's not going to be the stone, that the truth that you build your life on, that's going to jack you up. That's going to be tragic. You can depend on that part, but the structure, whatever you build on top of it, that's for you. That's your side of things, right? So.
Yep. So that makes sense. The collapse is great. It's like Humpty Dumpty had a great fall and it was tragic.
Right. Yeah.
Essentially.
It's great. I guess it's great in two ways, right? And that's what's, again, if we read this in the Greek original, especially in Hebrew and the Jewish people like their poetic way of poetic verses and stuff, you would catch probably words that are trying to compound on top of, or concepts that are meant to express two things at the same time. Great in terms of breadth and great in terms of weight, for example, right?
Right.
So it's like a great expanse on top of a great ocean of water, So it's like two different greats, and that's what's probably trying to be expressed here as well. It's like that's how really great this is going to be bad. It's like great in the fact that it collapsed in the first place, but great also in the fact that you have nothing left after that. You
lost your life. Yeah.
You've just got sand. You've got sand, and that's it, And so that's
cool. That's
the concept. Okay, well, let's hit up level 8. Matthew 8. I don't know why I said level 8. Da, 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 da.
8th level of Matthew.
That's right, the 8th level. I like it. All right, if you want to continue.
A man cleansed. When he came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. Right away, a man with a serious skin disease came up and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Reaching out his hand, he touched him, saying, "I am willing, be made clean." Immediately his disease was healed. Then Jesus told him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses prescribed as a testimony to them."
So people are wondering, like, okay, he went from teaching to now doing these miraculous things, and part of the reason why Matthew has set it up this way. Now, this isn't necessarily chronological, and I think I've expressed this before.
Yeah.
But Jesus just said, let your deeds authenticate who you are, right? And what Matthew is trying to do after just showing this great teaching that people said, wow, he sounds great. He's got like a lot of authority in his voice. He sounds cool. The thing that Matthew's trying to do now is watch his deeds now. The authority he has to put some oomph into those words, not just that they're flowery and amazing in and of themselves. The teachings are really great. They sound good, but he's trying to show that he has the power. There's two things going on, but one of them is he has the power of God. He's got the backing of God. God's anointing that teaching with deeds of great healing and majesty. And that's what he's doing here. It isn't, to me, it's not casual, I guess. It's not a happy accident. There's something he's trying to put across here. The other thing that
he's not bragging about it.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I think is really interesting here too, that people miss is the idea that the person coming to him believed in him before he got this disease healed. That's actually it's an interesting theme. You'll probably see that later on. I just want to mention it now. I won't go too deeply into it, but the idea that you have faith in this person, and he says, look, yeah, that's the other part, right? It's like, I have faith that you can do it. If you are willing, you can do this thing for me. You can heal me. And then the question is, okay, well, is Jesus willing? And so that's what happens. And we'll go to the next story because it is very interesting. But this chapter and some of the following ones are very focused on the idea of what faith is. And it's very subtle. So I'm just putting that out there, and we'll see how it goes. So
sure.
I'll let you continue. All right. Do you want to continue?
Sure. Sorry. On my way back. The centurion's faith. When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, pleading with him, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, in terrible agony. I will come and heal him, he told him. Lord, the centurion replied, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be cured. For I too am a man under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, Go, and he goes. And to another, Come, and he comes. And to my slave, Do this, and he does it. Hearing this, Jesus was amazed and said to those following him, I assure you, I have not found anyone in Israel so great a faith. I tell you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus told the centurion, Go, as you have believed. Let it be done for you. And his servant was cured that very moment.
So obviously Jesus is Jewish, and he was thought right from the start. And most of the people that are it's Israel, right? Most of the people that are there are Jews. They're of the Jewish Israel nation, and they come from the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And basically what he's saying here is a pretty radical thing. He's saying this Roman, who is an occupying soldier, who has no right to come to a Jewish guy, a Jewish prophet, a teacher, right, and miracle worker, and ask for the help of his servant. He has no right, zero right. He has no reason to do it. And yet, not only did he come humbly and ask, but he also expresses the extent that he believes in Jesus' authority over at least if not life and death, then over disease, over being able to heal. And then he brings it up, and he could have just ended there. Jesus like, wow, that's some great faith, man. Absolutely, no problem. But instead, he says even more than that. The people who have the right to be here by birth, the Jewish people of, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Those people will get kicked out of the kingdom for people who are really God's sons, who are those who simply trust and believe, to have faith. And that's like, you might as well, that's a really crazy thing to say. Like, that was a really, at the time, that was all the whole concept of the Messiah and everything he would do, this Davidic like person. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing based on what the Jesus people are expecting in Scripture, right? They're expecting a warrior king to come in, slaughter all the Romans, free all the Jewish people, establish a new temple, establish a new throne, and rule over the world. But instead, he's like, no, this Roman guy, he's got it. He's got it. Out of everybody else in Israel, this guy's got it. It was like a slap. It's like a slap across the face.
I mean, it's no wonder that some people got mad and betrayed him.
Right. Exactly. He's not living up to their expectations, what they expect him to be like. He's a salmon going upriver here. And everybody else is like minnows going down to the ocean thinking, oh, we got to go to the ocean anyway. So, but anyway, very cool. I think that's it's very neat. If you want to
Feelings at Capernaum. When Jesus went into Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. So he touched her hand, and the fever left her. Then she got up and began to serve him. When evening came, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed. He drove out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick, so that what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. He himself took our weaknesses and carried our diseases.
It's interesting. I just a comment on things like demons and spirits. I have always been, look, the reason why I believe in what I believe is because of the logic behind it. I believe that God logically exists, and I believe that the evidence points to Jesus living, dying, and being risen from the dead.
Okay.
And so when it comes to miracles, when it comes to demons and spirits and everything like that, that's where I actually have a lot of hard. It's hard for me to believe in such things.
Really?
It's really hard. I'm not a usual, even though I've done and technically I've done an exorcism, technically I've done one. I've seen it.
Oh.
Yeah. I won't go into it too much because it's personal. It's a family thing. So I don't want to do too much of that,
Sure.
But nevertheless, I've been acquainted with the level of malevolence that is within a human being, not just naturally, that people are bad. Really, they can be really evil, really evil. Looking in the mirror, I've seen that in myself, but I've seen beyond that to some degree. I don't know how to explain that. I don't know how to quantify it because it's not a quantifiable thing, right? The reason why it's so ephemeral and ineffable and all that stuff is because it's not really within our physical realm, right? You can't quantify it. Right. You can't put God in a box, and you probably can't put demons and angels and that kind of stuff in a box either, right? That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Quite the opposite. I suspect they exist a lot more than I'm comfortable with even thinking about.
It's just not on our plane of existence.
Right, exactly.
Reality. There's crossing lines somewhere.
Right.
Quantum's, I don't know. I believe in the macro and the micro.
Yep.
In all infinite.
Yep. And so when scripture, when the Bible talks about stuff like demon possessed people or driving out spirits and healing people who are sick, you know, my first question tends to be, what does that mean? Right? Is he really extracting a entity from a person? And for the scientific modernist type of person that I tend to be, more modern thinking than postmodern anyway, right? Mm-hmm. It is extremely difficult for me to accept this, or at least to wrestle with it, you know, because a modernist thinks very naturalistically, right? They think like you can quantify things, you can put everything in a box, you can check that box and, you know, put it on a shelf, and that's where that shelf
scientifically proved.
Yeah, scientifically proved. It's like, and it really comes from a control freaky, you know, core, right? That's fundamentally what a modernist is. It's just a control freak, you know. So I'm trying in my own walk to be much more pre-modernist, you know, or I think pre-modern is probably the best way to talk about it, because there are things in this life that are not so easily explained. And the most humble thing a person probably could do is to say, I don't know. I really don't know about that. And when you claim to know something, know it thoroughly, or at least enough to be authoritative on it, you're kind of taking on your, you know, you're taking on something that I don't know a lot of people realize, which is why I actually have no problem with people being agnostic. You know, I don't mind it. The atheism, because I was an atheist, I used to think that I knew that God didn't exist. God does not exist. That was my statement. You know, that's a pretty, you know, extreme point of view. But so is, I know God exists. That's also an extreme view. And so the weight of evidence falls upon me to back that knowledge up. How do I know? Right? And so that's where the logic thing comes in. That's where the discourse, and again, we won't get into it, but I'm much more comfortable on that. The weight of evidence usually goes on the person who says, I know something. Okay, how do you know? If you can't answer it, then maybe we need to move towards that humility, move more towards that humbleness, right? So, anyway, all that to be said.
It's a big topic. It's one that doesn't really have an exact solution, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be eons, or until we can prove or disprove it. It's sort of in a perpetual state of either. Yeah.
all that to be said, when it comes to entities other than God, which makes sense to me, and I'm not saying it doesn't make sense that demons and angels and ghosts and stuff like don't exist, or exist rather, but like miracles and that kind of stuff and demon possessions, that's the stuff that I'm quick to say I'm not really sure. I don't know. What I do trust and what I do know is that God exists, a non-physical, non-temporal being, and therefore beings that are non-temporal and you know, non-physical, that they could also exist, which we could just label them as aliens or demons or ghosts or goblins. I don't care what you call them, you know, but that's how I quantify it. So I have to at least come to the decision of, maybe that stuff does exist, and maybe the human body or the human spirit functions in a way that is not always physical and temporal, that we have a non-physical, non-temporal part of our existence that we're not fully, you know, cognizant or in tune with. Call it the soul, call it the spirit, whatever you want to call it, the mind, right? There's something there that is not just ones and zeros.
It's a non-physical connection that we can't quantify,
right,
or measure.
And that sometimes can get fucked up. And that's the way I look at it. So, Sorry, my screen's getting all wonky on me here for some reason.
I guess the thing that makes me think pretty deeply is the fact that our dreams connected to that non-physical everlasting sort of thing, or is it just a production of our physical brain? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd like to think that there's more to dreams than just random synapse sparks.
yeah. I think the answer from my view of things, I think it could be both, right? Because I don't think it's easy to divide a human being into just physical, right, or just temporal. Like there's a part that is physical that the dream connects with, right? That it is a process in our brain that is downloading information, that is going into long-term memory. That I think is true. But there is also still this idea that the human mind or the human soul or the human spirit, but again, I don't really care how you describe it, whatever word you use, the thing that is non-physical about us does touch the rest of non-physical reality, right? Whatever that is, whether that's God, whether that's heaven or hell, or like whether that's manifesting something or having something come into it, I don't know. Whether we're crossing over time, right, and we peer into the future and gain or garner some modicum of what could be, and then later on we have an event that's like, geez, I feel like I've seen that before, and so you have deja vu, right? Like
Deja vu.
right? So I mean, like, I don't dismiss that stuff offhand. What I don't do is put all the weight of the world or of my life onto things that I can't really logically rest my feet on. And I think that's where the foundation thing comes in, right? What is truth? To hold fast to that foundation that is rock, and anything else that's sand, it's not to dismiss. Like, sand's great. It's good. Like, you can play with sand, you can make sand castles and everything like that. And that's great. But that's not something to rest your entire life upon. And that's where my concern ends up being, where people will go and do like ghost hunting, or they'll go, they'll be exorcists or whatever, or they'll be prophets or tarot card readers or whatever it is that's in the ephemeral, that is about the non-physical stuff, but it tends to be divorced from reality so far as that it's not life sustaining, like the foundation with which you can build your life. That's the part that I fear, I think. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I actually do tarot myself. I don't know if I ever told you that.
Yep. Oh, Shanna does tarot, and like, great. I mean, it's awesome. It's just, but
Fun. It's not.
It's there's always, to me, that's where my modern tendencies go from, basically, my usual pushback. So I like I said, I've myself have done the whole exorcism thing purely by accident. I didn't go into it thinking that. I did it because it came up, and I was like, and so, okay, well, I know what ought to work based on my reading of scripture, and I'm not foolish to think that I have that innate power to arm wrestle a demon. I'm not stupid enough to do that. What I do know is that I can facilitate, because I actually believe, kind of thing, right? And so when that circumstance came up, I participated in it to the extent that I thought was appropriate. But I'm sure not going to go to school for exorcism.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. It sounds cool.
It is interesting, like, especially way to think about it, especially just reading from Matthew 8 here, how he's like, oh, well, they brought the demon possessed and he just simply drove the spirits out. I mean, Jesus can do it. Right. You should be able to too, if you believe. Yeah.
No, it was, like, if I could be a freaking, John Constantine, I would love to be John. That would be an amazing job. I mean, go around fighting witches and demons and all these evil people and stuff. It'd be sweet. Yeah, I mean, demons. Yeah, I've got Archangel Gabriel, coming around or whatever it was.
That's a rough road, though. That is a rough road.
But I would still do it. I think it would be great. It sounds awesome. But I'm not an idiot. It's not something with which you look. You don't build a life. You don't build a foundation upon that, unless. Yeah. Here's my caveat to that: unless you are really called to do that, like you have an explicit, hey, this is what I built you for.
Are supposed to be
right. Yeah. Like I built you for this. Naturally gifted. Yeah, and so fair enough. If that's like my I'm cautious is my point. Like don't nobody just because you have an interest in it, like go off. That's my fear. So anyway, if you want to continue, wait, we did this one already.
Healings.
Yeah, this is the one where we are following Jesus. This is
when Jesus. This is the what?
This is the tough one. Not tough one. This is just Go ahead.
Sure. We'll get into it. Yeah. When Jesus saw large crowds around him, he gave the order to go to the other side of the sea. A scribe approached him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus told him, "Foxes have dens and birds of the sky have nests, but Sons of Man has no place to lay his head." "Lord," another of his disciples said, "first let me go bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." That's interesting.
Yeah. So what the hell is he talking about?
What the hell is he talking about?
He's like, what the hell does that mean? So the first part is interesting. He's trying to express something more of a nomadic understanding of what it is like to be a follower of Christ, of Jesus. And he says, look, there are some people in this life that have homes, they have places that they belong. You're going to naturally be alienated if you follow me. That's really what he's saying here. So foxes have dens, birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He doesn't have there's something unnatural in one sense of being a follower of Jesus. That's nomadic, that's lonely, that is like in exile naturally. And so to commit yourself to Jesus is to be an alien, which is a really what? How does that make sense? And especially for a people, Israel is always about having their kingdom, having their home, right? So what's he talking about? Why is this so contrary to what it's like to be a Jewish follower of a rabbi, right? Of a teacher. And so he's pushing things off. Yo, Cujo, how's it going, bud? And so so he leaves it. The thing is he doesn't say anything after that. He just leaves it. He doesn't elaborate. And then the next guy says, "Hey, well, I really want to follow you, but let me just go bury my dad. He just passed away." He says, "No, if you're going to follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead." Right?
That's interesting.
And so he's trying to, there's a sense in which he's trying to express the nature of being a follower of Jesus, really. And it's a recognition that the priority is actually supposed to be the one doing the teaching, and everything else is secondary, which is a really big ask. Like, it's a huge thing to say, which is why there's so many zealous people for Jesus out there, because I think this is what they hear, right? And he's saying, the rest of your family is no bueno, or cut them out, or, at least leave them secondary. They're not as important. And it's like, that's such it's for anybody to say that is crazy, right? Like, I don't know. It seems crazy to me. If I were to tell you, right, actually, Dad let his family, we're not going to go to the funeral. We have more important things to do. We got to go this way, and I have some teaching to do, or whatever it is. Like, you would think I was crazy for doing that. And The only reason why I think it would be crazy is if you weren't expressing the reality and the explicitness of what you are. And so for Jesus, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to explain that he actually is of that level of authority, that if you really want life and goodness, that's who he is, that he is that pinnacle. And the only reason he says that is because he is God, right? He's God in man's flesh. And so for anybody else to say that is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But he's trying to express that that's what he's like and show that line. So the question is he, right? Is he that person? So, but yeah, I think, go ahead.
Do you see any similar, it's completely kind of different line of whatever, but do you see similarities between Jesus and Buddha, the Buddha? Like pre-Buddha? I can't remember his name right now.
In terms of an archetype, maybe, right? Like the actual
Siddhartha Gautama.
Right. In terms of the person himself, not really. As an archetype, probably, like as a story figure,
like
as
for his own people in his own way.
Right. And so I guess the question is, like, is he a version of, God, or a version of the divine, a divine son who has wisdom? I would never go that far. In terms of the archetype as a wise man, right? As like, there are people who have some level of insight and understanding of the way the world works, and their way through that world is very much a deviation from the standard. Like, most people are very much about survival, which tends to be focused on family, tribalism, perhaps, hunter-gatherer, like these sorts of concepts. The wise man that Jesus follows as an archetype of, right, as well as Buddha and others, like those types of people, like they clearly exist, right? They've clearly existed across history. But in terms of like, yeah, I want to equate the same as being equal, I guess, is where
that makes sense.
Right. That's where I would probably say, no, there's certainly big differences. So not
an archetype. That makes sense.
Yeah, not only in personality and what they did, but I would say in their teachings as well. So
like what they stood for.
Right. For sure. So
absolutely.
So I just want to be, and that's not to dismiss either of those, but yeah, it's good. I was going to say one more thing. In terms of this might also be an off comment of Jesus, in terms of a person who cannot follow him, in the sense of he might not be saying just the physically dead, right? He might be saying the person who is already lost or has been lost for whatever reasons, right? Soul-wise. Let them be buried by the people who are also off, not recognizing God when he's amongst them. If you see God, and again, God in the sense of the greatest conceivable good that will save you, that can radically transform you, if you see that before you and you choose instead to go after what is already dead spiritually, as well as physically perhaps, right? Then that's your choice. He said the better action in that case is to follow me. I'll take care of that. If I'm really God, I got that, Trust me, life and death stuff, I've got that. But right now, what's important is before you is the ones claiming, at least implicitly, that I have wisdom that you need to live, not just now, but forever. And that's the delineation. That's the the emphasis in which he's saying these things. It sounds harsh because it is harsh, but it's also reality, at least so far as he's concerned from what he's saying, right? And so, yeah, like to me, that's, again, it's crazy, but only if you're not God, only if you're, not in that place of authority that you've proven. Like I'm raising people from the dead here. I'm giving you wisdom with which you live your life by, and if you really want to follow me, if you really want that, there's probably going to be consequences. There's going to be a division. There's going to be a sacrifice that has to be made. Okay, well, that's fine. We'll continue from there. If you want to continue.
Wind and wave, obey the master. As he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a violent storm arose on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he was sleeping. So the disciples came and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to die." But he said to them, "Why are you fearful, you of little faith?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the sea obey him."
Yeah, and so to me, that's an interesting story to punctuate his very harsh, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." It's like, look, I'm not saying this without a recognition of who or what I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, this is Matthew putting this stuff in as well. So it's not like it's necessarily chronological or anything like that, but it is interesting that he chooses to do that. So, and that's actually something that, to me, it might be interesting to mention too. If there was any way, anything that a person can tell you to put you off following him, it's to say, "Screw your family, follow me." I mean, that's not what he said exactly, but still, right? And so a lot of people, one of the common things that come up is like that people crafted this story or this character, for example, of Jesus, so that they would make him the most attractive and attract as many followers as possible. That sentence, to me alone, right? The idea of like rejecting your family, not burying your father, for most cultures, for most cultures across history, that is that's the worst thing a son or daughter could do, is to just dismiss their father. And so to me, that's not what a person intent on trying to attract and make a big religion, and craft this story would ever write. It's very illogical to me to think that that's unless he actually said that, right? And it's you go and you're being faithful to the things he said, right? You wouldn't write that to try and marionette some kind of religious order across the world. Right? You would leave that out. Well, that sounds harsh. Nobody wants to hear that. So they'd scratch it out, That would be tampering. And so, I don't know. Like, to me, it's interesting that people bring up some of these arguments. So I just thought that's one of the apologetic arguments that
that is interesting.
That comes up. So anyway,
he said some harsh things in the earlier Matthew verses, but this one kind of takes the cake.
Right? So, okay, you want to continue?
Demons driven out by the master. Ooh. Interesting. When he had come to the other side, to the region of the Gadarenes, two demons. Say it again.
Gadarenes, I think.
Gadarenes. That works. Gadarenes. Two demon-possessed men met him as they came out of the tombs. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. Suddenly they shouted, "What do you have to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now, a long way off from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. If you drive us out, the demons begged him, send us into the herd of pigs. Go, he told them. So when they had come out, they entered the pigs, and suddenly the whole herd rushed down a steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. Then the men who tended them fled. They went into the city and reported everything, especially what had happened to those who were demon-possessed. At that, the whole town went out to meet Jesus. When they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. That's interesting. That's the opposite of following.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so he's doing stuff now. Here's the summation of this chapter that he's done so far. He's freed a bunch of demon-possessed people, and then he said, don't tell anybody about it. And then when they do go tell about it, the people come and basically say, get the hell out of our region. You just killed a bunch of our pigs. You know, that was a herd of pigs that was about us. You're bringing too much change. You're freaking us out. He's like, oh, you want me to freak you out? I'm gonna tell you to go and leave your pop, who's just waiting to be buried, and come and follow me. Like he's doing things that seem very counterintuitive to someone who's looking to garner the crowds. He's always trying to be like much more low key than that, which I think is really interesting. I'm trying to remember. There's something about the pigs. Pigs in kosher and Jewish culture, I think, are dirty animals, and they don't eat them, if I remember correctly.
That sounds poor.
And so, but the language that these guys use is really interesting as well. So, what do you have to do with us, Son of God? Jesus never calls himself the Son of God because he thinks it's secondary to what's actually important, which is Son of Man. Not secondary, I shouldn't say that. The emphasis of why he's here is about fulfilling the one like a son of man, which is a prophecy. Every time he says Son of Man, he's heading back towards a prophetic title, right? About one like a son of man who basically comes and saves, right? But these two demons automatically recognize him for who he is. Says, you're the Son of God. It's like, look, we realize that we're supposed to be tormented at some point because we're demons, but that's not the appointed time. What do you have to do with us? Like, why are you here? And then they said, well, let us just kind of go into the herd of pigs. So there's this idea that Jesus is kind of like negotiating with demons here. And the irony, of course, is like what he does is he puts them into the filthiest creature in Jewish idea and Jewish custom, and he ends up letting them all die anyway. So the negotiations of like, oh yeah, we'll be kind to you and everything like that, that's kind of a weird take on it. Some people think that this was like a good take, like it's like, oh yeah, he's being bigged up by demons or something like that. But anyway, it is interesting that they kick him out of town though.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just crack open my crazy super Bible because there's a few things here in the margins.
that whole end of Matthew 8 is curious. Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism of pigs in the Bible for sure.
Okay, let's see here.
So I guess I just did a quick research about the not eating pork thing with Jews, and it's essentially animals such as cows or sheep chew the cud, which is they partly digest their food and then they bring it back up to chew again. The fact that pigs don't do that makes them unclean.
Right. So that's in the Old Testament. So it's there's there's a few. They have, like I said, those prohibitions in terms of what to eat, what sets them apart essentially, and so they have the kosher, the
exactly.
I think they have like certain seafood as well, like shrimp and
they
shellfish
said
or something.
anything from the sea has to have fins and scales, so that would leave out like shrimp and lobster and shellfish.
So that's and Jesus does end up talking about that too in it would be in Acts, in the book of Acts, which is, so there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which are the first four, the Gospels, basically. So they are primarily revolving around the life of Jesus and his story and what happened to him. So you have 4 crucifixion stories, obviously, all obviously the same person, but just different takes on it.
Cool.
And then you have the book of Acts, which is the Acts of the Apostles. So everything after Jesus basically dies and is resurrected and then ascends into heaven.
I don't remember that at all. I don't think I ever went through that chapter at all, or even in Sunday school. It's not something I focused on.
Yeah, it's interesting because the book of Acts is very much it's an establishment of the first church is what it is, right? Okay. And so it starts off with like Peter, which we kind of met briefly, or we will kind of pick up on some of it. Anyway, so it's got, Matthew, Peter, all those guys basically set up. But you also get introduced to this Jewish guy named Saul of Tarsus. And he's like the number one, I want to kill Jesus followers guy. Like, I'm like Pharisees and I think he's actually I think he's a Sadducee or a Pharisee. I can't remember, but he's in that line. And he says, send me out. I will persecute. I will make sure that God's enemies get smitten. And these are evil, Jesus followers who are trying to besmirch the Jewish God kind of thing and make this new cult. I'm going to cut down all these cultists. And then basically Jesus shows up on the road and goes, bam, blinds him. And he's like, why are you persecuting me? What the hell, man? And he gets screwed up. And he's like blind for a while, and then essentially, basically, he gets another one of Jesus' followers. Jesus talks to him and said, "Hey, go and like talk to this Saul guy, help him out." He's like, "Wait, Saul of Tarsus? That's the guy trying to kill us all, and has killed us, or at least participated." He's like, "Don't worry about it. Just go talk to him." And he basically heals him, and then. Basically, Saul becomes Paul. And so Paul becomes the biggest apologist for Christianity after that. He becomes like...
Interesting.
He becomes like... And so anyway, so that's like a big portion of the book of Acts. But it also has to do with Peter and a lot of the other apostles kind of going out from Israel into the Roman Empire, essentially. And just saying, hey, this is what happened with this Jesus guy. He lived and he died and he was resurrected on the third day. And then he ascended into heaven, and you should like follow him and stuff. And so that's the whole missionary beginning of what we now have as Christianity. And it goes from this small sect to everybody who believed in it dying a martyr's death. Like virtually everybody, like Peter was crucified upside down because they thought, oh, well, if he's crucified upside down, he'll go to hell instead of heaven, and pretty much everybody gets murked because of what they believed. And that's probably the biggest, I think, apologetic or defense of Christianity, is that most people will die for something that they can gain something from, kind of thing, but they'll never defend something that is a real lie. They'll always, most people who like what was one of the most famous things that was said was 2 or 3 guys couldn't hold a secret for the government when they were like put up on charges for like the Watergate stuff.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that 12 dudes went to their death believing in the life and death of Jesus Christ because they thought it was a lie? Like, sorry, but like most people won't die for a lie. They only die for something they really, really believe in. right?
Yeah.
And all of them died. So all of them went to, like they all died young. They all got their heirs anyway. So
We'll get there.
crazy. But yeah, it's a good book. It's interesting anyway, and it also expresses the ideas of, Christians having the same authority of Jesus, and so it gets into this idea of like faith healing, and like that, like if I'm a Christian, then technically I should be able to heal or speak in tongues or that kind of stuff, and what that
Or
really
exercise
and that kind of stuff. Which again, I'm the first person to be really like kind of back of the bus kind of on that stuff. But I can't deny that it's not at least discussed in scripture. So, but yeah, I think that's probably good for now, unless there's other questions or anything like that. That's
the only question I had is how many chapters are there in Matthew?
Oh, chapters in Matthew are 26, if I remember correctly. Maybe it's 28.
We're only on 8.
28. I lied. 28. Yeah. So, there's quite a few. I'm going to try and do 2 per week is what I'm hoping to get through it a little faster.
There's always a lot to talk about.
Yeah. I'm also, we were able to kind of get through it because not a lot of the audience had a lot of questions, which kind of threw me off last time.
Yeah.
But yeah, what we'll basically, to give you kind of an understanding or a heads up of how the chapters end up going is a good portion of it is different teachings. So we've kind of gone through the Sermon on the Mount, which is a very sort of how you call it? They're exhortations, right? So they're do this, don't do that kind of teachings. Very straightforward, minimalist. What you're going to come up here pretty quick is Jesus's parables. So parables are basically larger stories. They're kind of more akin to like the Three Little Pigs, right? They're actually breakdowns of larger spiritual concepts into story form. And he says, there's this parable about this guy, right? This sower. And he goes around, he has this type of seed, and he has this type of ground, and he's kind of doing this action. And this is the result. And so he takes the story, the concept, so you could do it with anything. It's like, there's this plumber who has 3 different types of plumbing. He's got copper, he's got plastic, he's got wood, and he plays, anyway, so he tells a story, and then he breaks it down into a more, and applies it in a spiritual way. So like the sower, it also works in your soul kind of thing. So, or like the plumber, it also works in your soul this way, or in heaven or hell, or trying to explain spiritual concepts in a more, reasonable, down to earth way using stories. So a good portion of that in the middle of this book of Matthew is like that. And then it gets into sort of some moral questions, but he breaks it down a little bit more. And those are usually going against the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So he's basically going toe to toe. He goes from teaching large crowds to teaching, in-depth stories to now there's people who are opposing him saying you're a fraud, or, well, what about this? And trying to catch him in his words so that they can discredit him. And those are the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then the last 5, 6, 7 chapters are Jesus's arrest, persecution, torture, and then his crucifixion, and then his resurrection. So,
and then we go through that 3 more times
in different ways. Yes. So it's going to seem like you probably heard some of it before, but it's interesting because it's almost never in the same order, and it's always coming at it from a different lens, and that's what I find really interesting about it. So.